Welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a moment here. I just want to give people a chance to join and get their audio dialed in. All right, looks like a pretty good mass, and I'll make sure that I type all this info out for people that are joining just a little bit later, but welcome to today's webinar. Before I hand it off to our presenters for the day, I just want to cover a few technical things in case you haven't joined us for a webinar in the past. We use Zoom Webinar, which is just slightly different from Zoom Meeting. The significant differences from your perspective are that your cameras and microphones are disabled by default. So if you want to interact with the panel, you've got two great options. You can use the chat just like you would normally in Zoom Meeting, with the exception that if you want everyone to see your message, you'll have to select everyone from the drop down there. And then if you have a question for the panel, we'll ask that you pop that in Q&A. Everyone can see a question, but you can ask those anonymously if you'd like to, and you can upvote and add your own comments to those questions as well. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Dr. Michelle Riconscente. I hope I said that right.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to be with you and to share the content, the topic of our webinar today, which is increasing enrollment, decreasing risk. I'm joined today by Corey Ebenhack and Jeff Sefcik, and we're going to get our slides running here just in a moment and get our session going. Okay. How's our screen? Are we sharing?
Yep, looks great.
Wonderful. Okay, well, welcome again, everybody. Again, joined today by Corey Ebenhack and Jeff Sefcik. This is a session in which we will talk over the work of Motimatic, our behavioral science strategies. We'll be sharing some practical tips with you and also walking through some recent results at Rogue Community College and Angelo State University. And here's an overview of our time together. Let's start off with some brief intros. Let's start with you, Corey, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your role.
Sure. Hi, my name is Corey Ebenhack. I'm the Vice President of Student Affairs here at Rogue Community College. I have been with Rogue about 23 years, but been in the profession of student affairs for nearly 30. And so I'm looking forward to today's presentation and sharing any information that might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Jeff.
Hi, my name is Jeff Sefcik from Angelo State University. I'm the Executive Director of Enrollment Management here. I've been here for about 35 years, but the most of that is actually spent in IT. I moved over to Enrollment Management about 8 years ago, and looking forward to sharing what we've done with Motimatic.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm Michelle Riconscente. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Motimatic. And I actually joined Motimatic as Chief Scientist originally because I had a background in academia. I was a professor for several years at USC and have conducted research in student motivation, student engagement, as well as the ways that assessment and data can support work with students. And so at Motimatic, I oversee all of our operational implementations. That includes our content strategy, client engagement, and product and engineering. And part of our presentation today will be now to turn to an intro to Motimatic, followed by some behavioral science strategies that we apply in our work at Motimatic, and sharing those as some practical insights that you can also work with in your own enrollment efforts at your schools. We'll then share some recent results in our work together with Rogue Community College and Angelo State University. And then our goal is to reserve a large chunk of the time today for Q&A. And so we encourage you to please drop your questions as we move through the presentation, as Mike said, in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we will address those as well as any other questions you have in the Q&A portion of our session today. So let's get started. As a starting point, I want to share a little bit about how Motimatic got started. So when we're talking about student enrollment and moving students through the enrollment process and even as active students, there are two core issues at hand. One is that fundamentally, we are looking to drive behavior change, to foster positive behaviors and choices on the part of students. And so fundamentally, enrollment is about helping students make choices and take actions. And in order to do that, you have to get students' attention. And so, as we know, that can be so challenging today with all of the inputs we have in our day-to-day. So the Motimatic solution approaches these two challenges by applying behavioral science, key strategies, insights from the research to foster behavior change in students. The second thing we're doing is getting students' attention by reaching them in the social media environments where they spend so much of their time. So we're present in all of those platforms, and the content we produce appears as students are browsing their social media feeds. So we get their attention there, and then we apply behavioral science strategies to draw them into your enrollment processes. So what this looks like in practice is that an institution will share with us a hard to reach list, a challenging list of students that they're looking to convert in some way, to have, for example, move from inquiry to application, application to enrollment, with the various steps that might happen in the middle. And so, as you know, the lists of students that might need to make their way through those processes can vary. They could be students who are newly admitted but have yet to register. They could also be students who registered some time ago but haven't taken the next step. They may be stopped out students, students who are continuing from prior term but haven't enrolled even as that deadline approaches quickly. So we support institutions in working with those hard to reach and hard to convert students, especially where teams are often overtaxed, right? You have your team working on enrollment at your school, your institution, and there's so much to do, and it can be impossible to really reach all those students, especially students who might have been quiet for some time. You tend to focus your efforts where you know you can get the quickest ROI, right? And so we can partner with schools in this way by taking on those hard to reach lists while that internal team focuses where their efforts are most effective. And importantly, and we'll speak to this as we go, our model is a pay only for results model. And we found that's been really helpful in building partnerships. Motimatic takes on all of the production, the upfront work. There's no IT integration. And then the payment only comes when we deliver results for you. And we'll see some examples of that as we move through today's presentation. So what happens next? So we receive the list from the institution, and then Motimatic produces ads. We call them guideposts because they appear as posts in student social media feeds, and they guide students through the steps that they need to take to be successful. We are applying motivation science, behavioral strategies, emotional response targets, and a number of data-driven optimizations to produce that content and then to sequence it for your students. So we sequence that content, and then through our technology, it flows directly into student social media feeds. And so as they're going about their everyday and they're present, whether it's Facebook, Pinterest, TikTok, Snapchat, wherever their choice of platform is, as they scroll through, they will see every once in a while a post like the one you see here, the examples that are here, that will encourage them and drive specific behaviors. A couple notes about that content. All of the guideposts link directly to schools' resources. So if it's an application process, the links will go to where you can submit the application or begin the application. If it's about new student orientation, the link will take you there. And so when students engage with that content in their social media feeds, they go directly to the places where they can take action and, again, move their way through that enrollment process. So as you can imagine, as we've worked together with a number of partners over the years, and as we've applied strategies from behavioral science, we've learned a lot, and we'd like to share some of those with you today. So let's take a walk through. The idea here, just to give you a sense of the our agenda for this portion of the webinar, is to walk through a number of the strategies that we apply at Motimatic and to give you some illustrations of how we do that work, with the idea that you can take some of these pointers, these tips, and apply them in your own communications. We happen to be present in social media. However, these strategies are relevant, whether you're using email, text, whatever form of communication you might be using. We hope that these strategies, you'll find them useful as well. So the first one we're going to look at is a set of strategies coming from motivation science specifically. I mentioned that I spent some time as a professor at USC and did a lot of work around student motivation, reviewing the literature and then conducting studies of student motivation. And it turns out motivation is an interesting topic because we all have the personal experience of motivation. And so it might seem like a general bucket of feeling good or feeling motivated. It turns out that when you study it, there are a variety of categories and frameworks, and applying the frameworks become tools in your toolkit to assess students' motivation and then respond to it effectively. So here are a couple examples. The first one we're going to look at is an insight from self-efficacy. This is coming out of Bandura's work. The core of self-efficacy is that we are more likely to take action when we feel confident we can succeed. Bandura's work is really interesting. He arrived on the scene as behaviorism, the stimulus response paradigm, was being questioned. And he was able to show that our thoughts, what we think about the situation, also has an effect on the choices we make. And in particular, our thoughts about whether we can succeed or not will affect whether we engage with a task and even the quality of our engagement with a task. So confidence is important. So then the next question would be, well, how do we build confidence? Turns out there are 3 key ways that we can build confidence. The first is when we see people that we perceive as similar to ourselves succeeding at the task. One of the examples I like to give is if you're in the gym and you see someone, maybe your friend or someone who's similar to you, lift a certain amount of weight, you might feel confident that you can also lift that amount of weight. But if an Olympic weightlifter walked in and lifted the weights, it wouldn't necessarily inspire your own confidence, right? Because you wouldn't perceive that person to be similar. So in the example we see here on the right, this is a guidepost around registering and creating a schedule. And it's someone who's very relatable, right? If this person can do it, so can I. My life is crazy, looks like hers is too, and she's making it happen. Another example for how we build confidence is we make the connection between our own prior successes and the task at hand. So you're accomplishing amazing things. So reinforcing for students that, well, you did these things that were really challenging. And that's another reason why you should be able to feel good that you can complete the next task at hand. And the last way that we build our confidence is when we take those really big tasks that can feel a little bit overwhelming and we break them down into smaller, more manageable pieces. Here's an example of that where there's a number of steps to go, but we can break it into simple steps and make them approachable, accessible, and feel like they're doable in the near term. The second insight from motivation science is from expectancy value theory. And this is the core here is that in addition to feeling confident, the value that we place on the outcome is also really important for the quality of our engagement and our likelihood of engaging with the task. So there may be things that you feel confident that you can do, but because you don't value the outcome, you're not very likely to engage in the task. So a couple examples of how you build people's sense of value, especially in the higher education arena, highlighting the future value of the degree the student is pursuing. And here's an example on the right. Set yourself up for jobs in high demand. So connecting the registration act to the future value for the student. Another example, especially when the degree might be a long journey, is helping students to see the near-term present value of being a student. And especially in cases where the knowledge that students are gaining in class, the connections they're making or the people they're interacting with has a present value, that can be powerful as a motivator. In addition, as people are studying, especially students who are in later in life, maybe with families, in careers and so on, setting an example is also one of the ways that there's a present value to a lot of people. So those are 2 ways that we can speak to the value that someone ascribes to that degree. The third insight is an appeal to identity. The core here is that we are more likely to behave in ways that are consistent with our sense of identity and our thoughts and our feelings. There's this interesting characteristic of human beings so that when we act in ways that aren't consistent with our thoughts and feelings, we tend to feel uncomfortable. And that's very true of our sense of identity, right? If we identify as being someone in the health profession, we are more likely to take actions that align to our idea of what it means to be in that profession. So a couple things you can do here, we'll play this video, is to reinforce the positive aspects of students' identities and sense of self, as well as connecting the action you're driving to the student's sense of self. So those are two levers there around sense of identity. This is an example of content for first-generation students. The third, or are we on our fourth? I'm losing track of our numbers. The last point here is to reinforce agency. This point comes from self-determination theory. You may be familiar with the concepts of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. One of the things that DC and Ryan showed was that as much as intrinsic and extrinsic motivation are distinct, there's actually gradations of extrinsic motivation. And there are kinds of extrinsic motivations that get very close to intrinsic motivation and therefore have a higher quality of engagement and likelihood of action. And one of the cores is the sense that we are in control of the choice of the action. I think this is so important in higher education because often students set out on that journey really feeling like they are the drivers, right? They are choosing to enter into that degree program. And then as they start going, there are a lot of requirements and it can feel like now they're being told what to do and lose that sense of agency. And of course, you will have many requirements as you need to as an institution to move students through. At the same time, there are a few ways that you can expand and reinforce students' sense of control and agency in the process. So first of all, giving students good reasons to feel good about the choice they made to study with you is one of the strategies you can employ here. So that might be through accolades, through program opportunities that you have at your organization, your institution. And the second thing that you can do when possible is to provide students with options to reinforce the sense of agency. So whether that's a couple ways to submit information, a couple orders of steps they might take, the ways that you reinforce that sense of agency will help students to feel like they're really in the driver's seat, and that will turn into a positive quality of engagement. I love this example on the right. It's a little bit of a video. What will you conquer next? So this is a registration guidepost. It's an ad to encourage students to register. And you'll see that instead of speaking to, you're late to register, right? It's really reinforcing that sense of agency. The choice is yours. What will you conquer next? So we've talked over a number of strategies coming to us directly from motivation science. We're now going to turn to 3 additional approaches that we have developed at Motimatic that we found to be really powerful in our work engaging students, especially in the enrollment process. The first of these is expressing care concretely. It turns out we are more likely to engage when expressions of care take concrete forms. I don't know what your experience was, but early on in the pandemic, I started getting communications. This is an example from Transamerica. Everyone was here for me, right? A lot of expressions of care. And certainly many companies took very virtuous steps during that time and continue to support people. At the same time, some of those expressions might have felt a little empty, right? A little sentimental. My dry cleaner cares about me, the shoe store cares about me. And so one of the things we've learned, and we learned this with the content that we serve to students, is that when care is expressed concretely, it is much more likely to be received by the student as caring and also to drive their motivation. So we found, for example, that rather than the "we're here for you, reach out," that very concrete expressions of information, factual information, how to, received much higher click-through rates and was positively received by students. The other way that you can express care concretely is to, when possible, ease or remove steps in the enrollment process. You may find, certainly a number of steps are required and are going to be important and can't be removed. You may find that some of the steps that are in place maybe were put there at some time and maybe are no longer necessary. Maybe there are ways to ease the process. Here's an example where some of the fees might be waived, right? Short term. And certainly letting students know that you're taking those steps, we want to make this easier for you. So we've done these things. So you can go ahead and call it out explicitly how you are making the process easier. And the last way you can express care concretely is providing clear information, right? So when someone arrives at your website, is it easy to understand what the process is so that they can move through that process and focus on the process, not trying to figure out what the process is. That's another way. The example you're seeing on the screen now, small steps propel big movement. And the copy here is reinforcing and highlighting the steps you need to take, so making it clear. I should mention that this content, you see the Motimatic brand there, this is coming from our catalog. When we work with schools, we will customize and align the content to your brand. So we never serve content to students that says Motimatic. This would be replaced with the client's logo and color scheme before it gets served to the students. The next principle, speaking as a friend. Especially in social media, we find this to be a really important part of our strategy. And you may find that it's helpful to you as well in your email communications and other communications with students, especially with how informal language has become. Finding ways to balance your professional presentation as an institution with approachable, accessible language is a helpful way to engage your students, to help them feel closer. Here are some examples. Register today and get your momentum going for fall. This is how we'll Zoom in the fall. The middle concept, your bright future is waiting for you. Very positive. What if registering for classes is as simple as clicking a link? Surprise, it is. And the last one, it's a fun one here. It has a little video to it. Even the image is informal, right? Socks up, kick back and get oriented. Virtual orientation, shoes optional, and even the font here is a little more relaxed to communicate that sense of speaking as a friend to a friend. And our last strategy is eliciting an emotion. This is a really interesting part of our strategy that we've evolved over time, and it's even become a litmus test for us. We want to make sure that all the content that we produce for students starts with eliciting an emotion. So especially in the social media environment, as students are scrolling, the first way you capture attention, and we talked about this as being the first challenge, right? One of the challenges to the enrollment process is getting students' attention, especially in social media, but really in any kind of communication. The emotion that you elicit is the very first thing that a person experiences, even from a neurological standpoint. The first thing we experience is that emotional response, and then we move to our thought processes, our cognition. So we've got a couple examples here of different ways of eliciting an emotional response. This is one that's a bit of surprise and pop, kind of intriguing. This is one of my favorites. This is for stop out students. And instead of where have you been, it's reaching out and saying, hey, we miss you. When you're not here, we feel it. It's not the same without you. So that sense of being missed. And this is a fun one. I like the suspense here and a little of the humor. The laundry monster. I don't know about you, I was certainly there as an undergrad. And so a number of strategies where we're eliciting an emotion. You may find if you take a look over your own email communications or the various ways you're communicating with students, think about what it feels like to receive that content. Do you feel inspired? Do you feel hopeful? Or do you feel like you've fallen behind and I need to catch up? And the more positive and motivating the emotion you can generate, the more likely you are to engage your students with the action that you're hoping for there. Wonderful. So we've now walked through some of those pointers. Again, they're coming from Motimatic's framework for how we produce our content, how we sequence it for our implementations. And we'd like to turn now to some recent results. And we will start with some results from Corey at Rogue Community College. We partnered together, and I'm going to hand the microphone over to Corey to walk us through how we got started together, and then we'll talk over some of those results. Over to you, Corey.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So this is a little bit of information about Rogue. In a good year, we have about 12,000 students. We're a public 2-year community college, so an open door institution without residence halls. We have 3 campuses in 2 counties and multiple degrees. I met Motimatic actually through my email. I am one of those people that read every morning the vendor lists that come into my email, and the Motimatic email really struck me as a different strategy. So just responding to that email got me connected quickly to them, and they were super responsive. Started working a little bit with their team to talk about, the outcomes that I could expect, how they were structured, and it seemed very simple and straightforward. I think one of the things that I liked the most was that we did not have to do a lot of interface with our current computer system, our SMS. They are a standalone platform. And they really, before they kind of sold me on their strategy, they listened to what our problems were at Rogue. And so we were having some particular challenges with changing some of our systems. We were struggling to maintain federal financial aid disbursements. Just doing some basic management during the pandemic had led to low student trust, high confusion on campus. Really, I think people had started to question the value, frankly, of coming to college generally, but specifically to RCC because of the challenges that we were facing. So our goals were to communicate clearly to our past students who had gone through some of these challenges with us that things had changed at Rogue, that we had stabilized our services, changed our federal financial aid platform, I think easier to communicate with. Had changed some of our registration systems. And so our goals were to reach our stop out students and really drive them back to registration with no additional hoops. We had changed how we do advising and registration. And so students who had previously been enrolled, we're free to just go right back to our reg system and get into a class. So communicating kind of those updates and changes, calling students to specific action, I think were our goals.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Going to go to the next slide for the
Okay.
results that we had here.
Sounds great.
So in this particular implementation, and Corey, do feel free to jump in and expand. We received a list from Rogue Community College of close to 6,000 students who had stopped out, going all the way back to 2018. So as you mentioned before, and I really appreciate some of the things there, Corey, that you shared around reviewing your processes, that concrete expression of care, helping to facilitate the process for students to engage with you, right? And also the power of social media is one of the things that we could partner to do with Corey and her team, where with the social media, you have the chance to appear multiple times and to really get a message out. And you'll see in a moment, some of the content is about the registration. And part of it, this is just to play a little animation there. We find that these calendar approaches work really well, turns out. But also to say this, we're invested in you, and to do this concretely. So an example here where we're invested in you, and there's some copy up above that gives some specific ways that Rogue Community College was there to support their students. Another example here, again, with the copy being very concrete. Degree audit tool, right, is a question a lot of students have, and so encouraging them to make use of that tool. And then the inspiration, your goals are greater than the hurdles you might encounter. So this was a launch where we had a really fast turnaround, right, Corey? It was just over 2 weeks to impact, and we achieved 278 registrations, which reflected at least an 8x immediate ROI in that present term to Rogue, and then of course for students to continue on an even bigger impact there. Corey, anything you'd like to add to?
The only thing I'd like to add is just we do have in our marketing department a social media strategist, and it was my experience that the skills that Motimatic brought and the strategies were not a duplication of the services that we already provided, but really a complementary effort. And so our marketing department felt as a partner to these efforts rather than feeling as if I had outsourced their job. They were appreciative and helpful and could see how this was accomplishing something greater really than we could do on campus. And our marketing department worked closely here. So it felt like a true partnership, and it was a very quick turnaround. Easy to work with. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And some of the strategies we applied here, as we said, were the concrete care, reinforcing student sense of confidence, eliciting that emotion, our emotional response targets, and speaking as a friend. Very good. Let's go now to you, Jeff, at Angelo State University.
Thanks, Michelle. Angelo State, we're a public regional out in West Central Texas, have about 10,000 students. You can see a lot of our primary programs there. That's our largest ones. As all of you guys have faced the last couple of years, there's always a lot of challenges in meeting enrollment goals. And I know each one of you have probably get an email or two from a different vendor just about every day. And you're always looking for ways to make an impact. When we had our first contact with Motimatic, it was just like all the rest of them via an email. And a couple of things that stuck out. We had not tried anything like this before, but also what Michelle mentioned earlier, basically the part that I liked the most was that you really only pay for what's actually delivered. So that's how we got going down the road with them. And we've kind of tried something really hard. And you'll see on the next slide, we've had 3 different launches with them so far. The first one we gave them, in my mind, something that was pretty impossible. It was a bunch of students that had applied in the fall and didn't enroll, and was going to see how many we might get to come in the spring, and they did get a few. So we liked what they did, and so we worked with them again to sign up students for our new student orientation the next summer. And basically what we did there was try to get them to the number of students there, you'll see, was really the lowest probability of students that were going to come. We use a tool to give us some statistics on kids on their likelihood to enroll. And so we took a very low cohort that all had less than a 10% chance to enroll, which is that number there, and let Motimatic work with them to push them to get them to come to register and come to new student orientation. And this right part of the slide shows that we did increase about 3 times what we thought we would get out of that same cohort of students. So we were very pleased with that as well. And we bounced through several of these guideposts as these students, as they went through. We did this for about 4 months and had great results. So we were very pleased, and that's what led us to this third one now, where we've got students that have stopped out during the pandemic, and we're trying to get them to come back for this coming spring. And so far we have over 50 students that have enrolled for spring. As with the previous one, I'm sure that there were some of those that were probably going to come back anyway, but I'm also pretty certain that there were some that were not, that Motimatic has made a difference on. And this has been a pretty short window here too. And it'll be wrapping up here soon.
That's right. Absolutely. So we've shown a few examples of the content there and some of the strategies around value. We tend to align the strategies to the student experience. So, the stopped out student, there's some reason, right, in their lives where they've discontinued that journey, and it may be personal issues, it might have been academic. And so we speak to a variety of rebuilding that confidence and reinforcing that sense that if they come back, they can be successful and there's real value there for them. Wonderful. So we've had a chance now to walk through what we do at Motimatic and share some of the behavioral science strategies with you, and walk through recent results at Rogue Community College and Angelo State University. And now we'd love to turn over the rest of the time for some interactive Q&A. We're going to bring up our view here on the Q&A window and see what we can see. See a couple of things here in the chat. Please go ahead and feel free to post your questions to us either in the Q&A area or in the chat window.
And while we wait for those to come in, I just wanted to reiterate that this is being recorded, so you can reference this later on by actually using the same link you used to join this live session, or alternatively, you can go to the website and register for it again if you so desire to. And yep, as Michelle said, you can use the Q&A or the chat if you have any questions or comments.
A question to Jeff. I'll read it for you, Jeff, and then we'll hand the mic to you. Jeff, you mentioned that you were maybe going to get some of those students anyway. If you're paying for results, how did you think about the ROI?
Thanks, Michelle. So what we did, I was telling you, we chose the students that had less than a 10% chance of enrolling. And based on that number of students, we thought we would get around 40 to 45 students. And we ended up with well over 100, 120. And so that's how it ended up. Now, part of what we had to do, you have to look at, just like I mentioned before too, you're going to be paying for some students that would have been coming anyway. But the cost was such that even when you include those in there and you look at the actual ROI for the rest of the students that were probably not going to come, the ROI is still great. Even if only 25% of those were not going to come, then you're still going to have a good ROI based on the cost that we have with Motimatic.
Just to add to that, the way that we do the pricing is based on the value of that action to your organization and institution, as well as the challenge it would be to drive that action, right? A very unlikely action carries a higher price point. And in any case, though, the goal is to get you in that 5 to 8x range, 5 to 10x range at minimum of an ROI. That's our goal. And so the pricing tracks there. Other questions? Roy, I'm curious to hear a little bit. I know you described a number of efforts that were put in place to make that process easier for students to navigate and kind of to help to draw students back in. I'm curious if you had some learnings from some of those processes, things that might have gone especially well that you might be able to share out with us today.
You mean just generally? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes, generally, or however you'd like.
I think, thinking about your framework, highlighting value, your confidence, value, identity, and agency. I hadn't thought about student affairs and student engagement according to principles related to behavioral psych. It sounds obvious when you say it. And I think when you talk a little bit about changes at your institution or changes to your system, behind your mind are those basic principles. You're trying to make things easier so students can see themselves doing it. You're trying to connect them to the relevance of taking that action, why we all think education is important in students' lives. Talking to people about that is difficult when maybe they are those first-gen students and they don't have other conversations happening in their lives about why they should come to college. So as we made our system changes, I believe, probably like everybody on this webinar, are very interested in communicating to students clearly about the importance of going to college, the changes that, you know, can manifest in your life. And building those systems so they don't trip students up, so they can hear these kinds of messages rather than get frustrated on your website or get in some circle, have to create another another username and password, download another app, you know, some just very simple, straightforward things. And so as you outline your strategy, I think that's what we were trying to do without really having these kinds of research words behind it. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It does. And what I found also in teaching, because when I was teaching, I was teaching EDD students, so Doctor of Education students, many of them in the classroom or in administrative roles. And I think it's similar that we do have an intuitive sense of a number of these principles. And I find that the value of those strategies is to provide frameworks so they become actual tools, right, that you can leverage. And having that explicit framework and that sense of the particular tools just helps to apply them more intentionally, and also gives you a chance to see which of those levers tends to be most effective in certain situations. So totally agree. And I think the power of that framework is, again, in that making it explicit, making it more specific so that you can use them with more intentionality. We have another question. Can Jeff or Corey speak to their implementation experience? How hard was it to work with IT? How long did it take overall? We need help for spring, but it may be too late at this point. It's an anonymous question.
I could jump in and then get out of the way and let Jeff speak. IT is not involved at all. Our marketing department and our social media specialist was involved. The reason IT is not involved is because you don't really need them. There is no interface with your system. This is a social media strategy that sits out on those other platforms. I think Motimatic is essentially just a user of Twitter, right? Or of Instagram or whatever that platform is, and uses messaging related to actions at your school to find your students out in those environments. So who is involved besides marketing is institutional research or your registrar. So a list of students, but it's not even a FERPA concern at all. A first name and a phone number, I think, is what we provided to Motimatic, and they found our students out on those social media platforms. And then our IT department tracked enrollment based on the lists that we had created, that we had identified internally. I feel like maybe that was a little bit of a zigzaggy explanation. Maybe Jeff can make that a little bit more linear, but IT, registrar, yeah, so I will stop.
Yeah, there really wasn't much of it for IT. They, as far as it's really just providing that little bit of data that Corey mentioned. I would say if you're trying to get started now, the biggest drawback, if it was me, the biggest drawback I would have would be working through contracts, because that's always the biggest pain I have. So that would be the only thing, is once you get through contracts, I think you could get it going pretty fast. And while you're working through contracts, you could go ahead and start working on the stuff with your marketing team and start getting some of that set up.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. And just to reiterate, it is a very fast go live process. Generally, as Jeff mentioned, as quickly as you can move the paperwork through your department is pretty much as quickly as we can get started. We have a very rapid onboarding process, and we are fully managed. So Motimatic by design is taking on really as much of the work as possible for you so that you can focus your efforts again where you have the work to do. And so there's a very straightforward review process of the content. And we also really support you in that data setup that doesn't require any IT integration. So we'd love to hear from you. I know it's an anonymous question, but please do reach out. We can see what we can do for you for spring. We have a number of clients going live even in these days right now.
Michelle, can I add one more thing?
Please, absolutely.
I think to anybody considering engaging with Motimatic, you should be familiar with your purchasing policies for your
Mhm.
Board of Education. So if you have a limit to the kinds of services that you can choose, for example, here at Rogue, it's a $50,000 cap. And once you pass that, we need board approval. So that can slow you down as well. Purchasing, board approval, I guess, are the most administrative hoops. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
Absolutely. And so, and also in those cases, we mentioned, excuse me, a pay for results model. If you do have a cap that we need to adhere to, we're able to work with you in that way as well. So we can implement a cap if that's critical for moving the process along. Very good. I'm keeping an eye on the various panels here. Any other questions? We'll give it another couple minutes, and then if there are no more questions, we will close our session, but we'll give it another few seconds here. Anyone who might be shy. Okay, going once, twice. I will hand this over then to Mike. Thank you to conclude our session for the day. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It's really been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us, and a special thank you to Michelle Riconscente. I hope I said it right that time.
Yeah.
No, I really appreciate the insight you brought to this, and we're glad that we're working with somebody who takes so much care into how they approach each project for the institutions and help solve problems that everybody's going through right now, especially pandemic. And a special thank you to Corey and Jeff for joining and sharing their experiences as well. Appreciate you guys coming out near the term here before we go into the holiday season and our well-earned breaks this year. So yeah, again, this recording will be available to view, and if you need to get in touch, I think Motimatic will be reaching out to attendees of this webinar at a later date.
Yes.
So, thanks everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.